Hello, good evening. Tonight we examine two stories shaking both political and economic foundations across Europe. Firstly, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's first major cabinet reshuffle arrives in the shadow of scandal, resignation, and Nigel Farage's growing presence on the right. With Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner stepping down over a tax scandal and senior ministers swapping portfolios, is Starmer restoring control or just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic? Secondly, a different kind of war brews, this time over big tech. The European Union hits Google with another multi-billion euro antitrust fine, prompting US President Donald Trump to threaten retaliation under Section 301. What's at stake in this new digital battleground between Brussels and Washington? Tonight we put both of these issues in focus. Welcome to the programme. I'm Mark Summers. So, Labour's Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, stepped down this week after failing to pay £40,000 in tax, sparking a sweeping cabinet reshuffle by Prime Minister Keir Starmer. According to the independent newspaper, critics within Westminster say the reshuffle feels more cosmetic than strategic. Same faces, just different roles. David Lammy has been appointed Deputy Prime Minister, while Yvette Cooper moves from the Home Office to the Foreign Office. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage is seizing the moment, holding rallies and warning that Labour won't last until 2027. Starmer says this is a reset, but many are asking, is it too late? Now, joining us to discuss these issues is Meher Nicolas Fursley, who's a geopolitical expert and a director of the EU SCN Centre. Thank you very much for being here with us. So what do you make of Keir Starmer's reshuffle?
Delighted to join you today. It's an interesting moment, and that reshuffle isn't over. So it started yesterday, and the final adjustments will happen in the next few hours. So, by Monday, we'll see the extent of the reshuffle. It is quite large by British standards. It wasn't necessary. UK, unlike its neighbors, Britain has a very thin constitution. So a lot of the constitutional laws in Britain are actually based on customs and traditions, as opposed to, lex scripta, written law, like French and German bureaucrats like to do. And so what I'm coming at, the Prime Minister didn't have to go that far. So, Angela Rayner had to go because, the seaside home she bought for £800,000 without paying stamp duty, or was paying very symbolic stamp duty, even though the lawyers had said, blah, 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 that she should. So basically, it was really... It smelled like corruption, and it came from, Angela Rayner, who's a symbol of the left wing of the party, because let's not forget that Keir Starmer is a Blairite, so he comes from the center right of the party, to make a long story short, and to get his job, right, he decapitated all the left wing, socialist, progressivist backbenchers who came from, the working class, right? And Angela Rayner was the only one left with true working class, Northern English, high school dropout credentials. And that's why he made her Deputy Prime Minister, because, he was telling the backbenchers, look, I'm not an evil, whatever, ultra-capitalist Blairite. My number two is one of yours, Angela Rayner. Her father was a plumber, her mother was a maid or whatever. She left school at 13. And sadly for Starmer, she started buying, second and third seaside homes in very expensive districts. And so it blew away the whole sort of, progressivist veneer. And so what I'm coming at now is the reshuffle. If you look at the CV of the ministers, they're all middle class and upper middle class.
Yes, well,
They are,
let's just, so Rayner had to go. I mean, she didn't pay this £40,000 in tax on what was considered a second home. She was not found to have done it on purpose, but she was the housing minister as well, so that was never going to last. But yeah, I wanted to come on to the biggest move that he's done in the cabinet, which is the Home Office. The Home Office is responsible, of course, for police, for immigration, one of the biggest issues in the UK. And he's moved Shabana Mahmood into that position. She's on the right wing of the party, very hard line on immigration and hard line on asylum seekers as well. What does this say about Starmer's priorities in what he's calling phase two?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would add, it's one of the two moves. It's the most visible, Shabana Mahmood, Home Office, and the other one is Pat McFadden, who's also a center-right technocrat. And for him, just for him, it seems that Starmer is creating a new super ministry, putting together economic growth, skills, and pensions, including pensions investments, like a super pension benefits ministry. I'll come back to that later. But yes, Shabana Mahmood, Home Office, policing, including policing illegal immigration. That's one of the two big shifts. And of course, it's happening in the context of the rise of a right-wing populist party led by Nigel Farage. And clearly, there are the opinion polls you and I know, right? Because they're published by the Telegraph or the Times. And there are the opinion polls, the secret opinion polls, that are tailor-made for politicians and for the government. And I think Starmer must have read in the past 10 days these qualitative opinion polls, very in opinion polls, and he freaked out, I think, because he saw that Nigel Farage was no longer perceived like a right-wing reactionary, blah, 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 cross between Trump and Eichmann. But more and more, he was perceived, I think he is perceived by working class British voters as an alternative to Labour and the Conservative Party. And I think that's why there was kind of a panic, because it's been 14 months. It hasn't been a success for Starmer. Granted that the four previous Conservative governments were disastrous. So poor Keir Starmer, when he came to power 13 months ago, his wings were a little clipped. But that being said, he has a huge parliamentary majority. It's one of the biggest parliamentary majority for any UK government in the past 30 plus years. And still he feels enfeebled. Like you said earlier, he feels, even though he is under no obligation to hold parliamentary elections for another 2 years, you can feel the panic, you can feel the pressure, you can feel, we live in the age of geoeconomics, as I always like to repeat. 5 days ago, there was a mini financial crisis in the UK government bonds market. The UK gilt market 5 years ago had a mini crash, and that's very bad, of course. And it's sending a signal of feebleness. Once again, back to Shabana Mahmood, why Yvette Cooper was, kicked out, because she did not deliver on the promise to restrain and limit illegal immigration. Now, it's true. You can always say, oh, the French and the Belgians and the Dutch are not helping us. But, even if you look at the French sort of issue, Keir Starmer made many concessions to the EU and the French in the past 13 months, thinking they would help him with the sort of illegal immigration issue, the invasion of southern England, quote unquote.
Yes, these are the small boats that are coming, going across to the UK from France that has everyone up in arms in the UK at the moment. And we're looking at the pictures of Shabana Mahmood there on our screens. But I wanted to come on to Nigel Farage. So for viewers who aren't sure, Reform UK is to the right of the Conservative Party. It's right on the right of British politics. He's very close to Donald Trump. He was in the White House this week. Nigel Farage. He's almost like a one-man band. He's only got a few members of Parliament, but he is leading in the polls. And Keir Starmer will think that there's the danger is coming from the right. Now, yesterday, when all this broke and Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, had to stand down, there's a reshuffle. This was the day of the Reform UK conference where Nigel Farage was making a big speech, American style, with sparks and lights and music. A massive speech, which was kind of overshadowed just a little bit by Starmer's reshuffle. That can't have been. That must have been a happy coincidence for Keir Starmer.
Yes, indeed. The optics. The optics is interesting because the reshuffle is happening at the same moment when Nigel Farage is holding a big, end of summer party conference in Birmingham, right? What's interesting, about Nigel Farage, he's not your typical European or British right-winger. So he defies categorization, even though it's true. Sometimes, he sounds like Trump. Sometimes he sounds like Jean-Marie Le Pen or Marine Le Pen, right? But sometimes he sounds like a center-left intellectual. Something very interesting happened in Britain 2 months ago. Keir Starmer was willing to let go the only steel mill left in England, and the symbolism is terrifying because steel mills were once the symbol of industrial revolution in Britain, right? And the only sizable steel mill operating, end of June of this year, very discreetly, Nigel Farage was happy to close it down. And it took a populist happening, Keir Starmer in June was happy to close that steel mill. And it took a populist, show of force by Nigel Farage, who sent a handful of MPs at the gates of that steel mill. And the right-wing MPs, from Nigel Farage's party, they were helped by local sort of socialist labor unions. That's very interesting. So it shows you that something is changing.
Well, that's populism for you, though, isn't it? I mean, they went for the populist view, and they're now promising everything to all people. 80 billion pounds is the black hole apparently in their
exactly
in the Reform UK spending. What they want to spend. And you were saying that only a few years ago we had the crash. That if Nigel Farage was to get into power, this is what many economists are saying, it would be even worse than what happened under Liz Truss's premiership.
Yeah, so Liz Truss's bond market, a huge collapse, happened 2.5 years ago, or 2 years ago, but there was a mini UK bond market collapsed 5 days ago, which happened, under Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. So it shows you the frailty of bond market. Interest rates in Britain are too high. Inflation is also too high. And here, Nigel Farage is a different kind of animal because unlike many populists in Europe, in mainland Europe, unlike some of the Trump people, Nigel Farage knows a lot actually about finance and economics. He was an institutional stock trader, financial analyst in the city of London for more than 30 years.
Man of the people. Man of the people.
He's a different animal. And another facet of the difference is, in Britain, in the early 70s, the Conservative Party changed a lot, and all of a sudden, because of cultural forces, Enoch Powell, who was a very bon chic, bon genre, nice, upper class, academic, scholar.
Racist.
He was a little xenophobic, etc., but in a very chic, upper class, Anglican, old-fashioned way, not in a Nazi way. All of a sudden, culturally, Enoch Powell's brand of slightly racist, upper class discourse, it became unacceptable to most conservative MPs and politicians.
Well, it's certainly back in vogue now with many people in Europe, isn't it? We're going to have to leave it there just for now, I think, because we have other matters to move on to other than British politics, because now there are issues in Europe as well. So from Rayner's resignation and Farage's rising tide, what's happening across in mainland Europe? I think that's something that we should discuss, because from the political reshuffles in Westminster, we go to digital sanctions across the Atlantic. Our second story involves money, power, and platforms, and a new tech trade war. Euronews reports that the European Commission has fined Google €2.95 billion for abusing its dominance in online ads.
Response.
Donald Trump has blasted the EU's decision as unfair and threatened trade retaliation under Section 301. The fine is the fourth major hit against Google by Brussels, but this one feels different. Trump's tone suggests the US is ready to fight back hard, possibly opening a new digital trade war. And as big tech stands trial in Europe, the political fallout may reach far beyond Silicon Valley. So we're still here with Maher Nicolas Fursley, who's with us. Do you see the EU's latest Google fine as legitimate, as a legitimate antitrust measure, or is this playing politics?
Very good question. Very good question. Very complicated question. So personally, I don't think it's a good antitrust measure, and the timing of it is annoying, to say the least. It's annoying both, of course, to the Americans, but also to the Europeans themselves. What do I mean by that? It's like, the time of politics. So when I say politics, I mean Ursula von der Leyen, really, because, France is diminished. Under Macron, France's influence in Brussels has diminished a lot. It has to do with the fact that there's a rapid economic decline of France. And so the French have very little influence in Brussels, behind the bravado and bluster of Macron, who thinks he can influence the outcome of the Ukraine war or the Martian war or the whatever Jupiter war. In reality, back home in France and Belgium, Paris's power is shrinking. So in that context of shrinking power in Berlin and Paris, there is a dominance of the EU Commission in Brussels. So Ursula von der Leyen is stronger than ever. So what happened at the very end of July, 6 weeks ago, when they had the Aberdeen summit in Scotland at Trump's golf course, after a full day of negotiations, basically Ursula von der Leyen, she yielded to Trump. So that day will remain in infamy in European history, because that 15%, she agreed, speaking in the name of France and Germany.
Yeah,
and the whole of
European leaders were not happy at all in that, right?
No, she overstepped. So there is also a constitutional gray zone, but profiting from the feebleness of Germany and France and their incompetence, quite frankly, she overreached, and she said, I'm speaking in the name of Europe. I bow to you, Donald. So she agreed to two things: a 15% tax. She agreed to that, one-way tax. So she said Europe would not retaliate. So they would take a slap on the face.
This is the tariffs, yeah.
15% tariff on European goods and services exported to America. And she also, speaking in the name of European private sector companies, agreed in the next 3-4 years that industrial giants from Milan, Paris, Frankfurt, Düsseldorf, they would invest billions of dollars every year in new factories in Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, not in France and Germany, Italy, which is really crazy. She agreed to all that. And here, she sugarcoated the Aberdeen disaster by saying, yeah, in reality, it's true that we had a big, America had a big trade deficit with Europe. So if we agree to pay that 15% punitive import
So
duty.
are you saying that this is sort of like a payback then for her mistakes?
Partly,
Partly.
partly, and also because
Okay.
the political time of von der Leyen is not the same as the time it takes lawyers, government lawyers and government economists and anti-competition, antitrust lawyers in Brussels. Yes, they work for the EU bureaucracy. It's true,
Okay.
but Ursula cannot give them orders like a dictator
Okay.
or emperor, and they take 5, 6, 7 months
All right.
to come to the
Well,
conclusion.
okay. I just wanted to ask you something though, Nick, because I want to get through a few things with you. You say that the Google fine is probably not, in your view, legitimate antitrust. What exactly is it that they're fining them for? Is it Google's monopoly with adverts, how they advertise on Google? What is exactly the problem?
I think they're accusing Google of a dominant position, not only in its core business, which is search engines, right? They're accusing Google of using the power of its domination of the search engine industry to dominate even more another industry, which is online advertising. So they're saying, yes, you're very good at search engine, you gather data from clients and you use them in a very monopolistic way or in a quasi-monopolistic way
So these are the
to
little
produce.
ads that come up when you make a Google search. There are certain adverts, aren't they, first in the search? Is that what they're talking about? They shouldn't be doing that?
Yeah, they're calling it an ad exchange competitive advantage. Once again, it's a gray zone. So it's a gray zone. It's difficult to prove. But the main point is it's the work, it's the production of lawyers, economists working in Brussels for 5 or 6 months. And the time frame they use to come to that outcome is not the Macron, Ursula von der Leyen time frame. You see what I mean? And so now that the EU Commission has a problem because they thought that by bowing to Trump in Aberdeen 6 weeks ago, they would close that chapter. And now, with that fine, with that 3 billion euros fine, trade war is about to restart. You know what I mean? So it's as if all the concessions, the humiliating concessions they made a month ago in Scotland may be in vain if Trump retaliates and restarts an across the board messy trade war. One last point I'd like to make is in Aberdeen, the justification for the humiliating defeat of the Europeans is blah, 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 trade deficit, blah, blah, blah. And here there's a problem. We measure trade deficit not in a very scientific way. So it's all goods, and most services, but some IT, search engine, computer, telecom services are not well accounted in that measurement of what we call trade deficit. And if we bring back the Amazon and the Google and the Silicon Valley services, computer services, IT services, if you bring them back and take them properly into consideration, it is not true that America has a big budget deficit with Europe. It's absolutely
America's just talking about cars and things like that.
yes, it's a fiction, and because they agreed to the fiction, because they bowed under pressure, the Europeans are about, after having lost their honor, they're about to lose a lot of money.
So what you're saying basically is because the American, I know Trump always goes on about the fact that Americans buy a lot of European cars. Of course, Europe, especially Germany, makes a lot of cars, and nobody in Europe really wants to drive American cars. Is the problem? But if you add in Google and Amazon and all this, it's a completely different story. But Trump is now threatening Section 301, more tariffs, digital barriers, another trade war. Is that what we are actually looking towards in reality?
I think so. And I think to be honest with you, Europe will bow down once again because they don't have the strengths or the will to fight. And it's exactly what happened. If you remember, it's exactly what happened in Canada 2 months ago. So the Canadians 2 months ago tried to slap a similar anti-competitive advantage, blah, 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 fine on Google. And Trump became very aggressive on Twitter and X and etc. And after 48 hours, the poor Canadians had to backpedal. So it may not take 48 hours, maybe it will take 2 weeks. But I think the poor European Commission will have, once again, to backpedal in shame because they're in no position to fight Trump because they're not. My argument is the following. These people, Macron, von der Leyen, Merz, they're not equipped intellectually to fight Trump because they are all neoliberals. They believe in waving the magic wand of free market economics. They believe in open borders, open tariffs. The Chinese and the Americans no longer believe in that. They believe in cold-blooded geo-economic warfare. So that's why the Europeans are losing at every corner.
So if they are going down this road of penalizing companies like Google and laying out these fines, is it because one side of the EU, the people who are laying out the fines, and the people who are the leaders of EU countries don't know what one of the other is doing? Or is it something deeper than that, a more of a fracture between the US and the EU when it comes to tech and trade? And why would they do? Why are they doing it if they know they're going to have to back down in the end?
Because the EU bureaucracy is a little disorganized. It's a big fat machine, and that probe into Google's practices started by very high level government lawyers and government economists, and they came out. After 5-6 months, they came to that conclusion. Fining an American company, Alphabet, Google's mother company, 3 billion euros, and she cannot, like a dictator, stop the process. So Ursula von der Leyen, even though she submitted fully to Trump at the Aberdeen summit 6 weeks ago, she couldn't just tell the government, the EU government lawyers and economists, okay, stop the work you're doing on Google. That bureaucratic process, legal process, had to go to its fruition. The Americans are better organized. What I'm coming at is in the White House, Trump can call the Justice Secretary and order him to start a probe into, I don't know, a British company or Airbus or Mercedes-Benz, just like that, in just half an hour. In Europe, there's due process, a lot of due process, a lot of bureaucratic procedures. And so that's also why when you go to war, when you go to economic war, like traditional war, if the other party is very well equipped, very well organized, aggressive, and you are like a medieval knight in a shining armor who takes his time and respects all the rules and regulations, you will lose the war.
So is it then just I mean, you say that they will lose the war. Is this just like a blip then in transatlantic ties, or is it the start of some kind of long-term digital Cold War? When you've got US dominance and then EU with their regulations. We've got about a minute left, Nick.
It's too late for a Cold War. America already won. And the reason why America already won is that to play the card of the Cold War, the EU would have to be cynical. They would have to play China against America in some circumstances, and in other circumstances, play America against China. They're not willing to do that. And because they're not willing to do that, they will lose, of course.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Meher Nikolov, firstly, for joining us with your views on the situation. Always a pleasure. As Europe takes on big tech and America retaliates, the question isn't just who controls the platforms, but who sets the global rules. From cabinet reshuffles in London to algorithmic crackdowns in Brussels, Europe finds itself in a period of deep flux. And whether it's political ethics or platform economics, the battles ahead will test not just leadership, but the frameworks of accountability themselves. Thank you very much for watching this evening. This has been In Focus. Have a very good night.